Welcome to All Is Well. I'm Dinah Krebs, your host. And on this podcast, we share inspiring stories of resilience and perseverance. Let's journey together to uncover the secrets to living life to the fullest, where we all live well. Good morning. This is Diana from All Is Well Coaching, and we are here today with Kristie Hidrogo. Kristie is a life coach who has built a career on just lifting women up. And she has her own story and her own path that she had to build resilience through. And now she's taking all of that to help other women go through it. So I'm super excited to hear about her story. And so I'm going to turn the mic over to Kristie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Diana. It's such an honor to be here with you. I'm so excited for you and your podcast. I'm a mindset coach and hypnotherapist, and I work with individuals helping reconnect them to their wholeness within. So I think you wanted to hear a little bit about my story and just kind of how I got here.
Yes.
Okay. So I am a sexual assault survivor, and this experience, and where I would like to preface this is that this journey that I've been on, I'm sure similar to many others out there who resonate with my story, has become for me about how I can speak from it from a place of empowerment, right? Not disempowerment. And so that has been one of the biggest lessons and shifts in my perspective. And so as a mindset coach, I'm going to say things like shifts in perspective and how I share my story. Because yes, while it can be quite sad, I've learned that a lot of these things that I've been through have been the embers that have been a catalyst for me to, propel myself forward and really ignite myself in this passion that I do today. And so the reason I start with being an assault survivor is that although at the time I didn't know it, that was going to be the thing that really ignited me and what really allowed me to want to not only work with women, but men as well, and really begin to help people transform the way they looked at the things that happened in their lives, those uncontrollables, right? And so at this time in my life that I went through this, I was actually my 22nd birthday. My husband, now we've been married for 15 years. We had been dating. And so I was taken and I was assaulted. And that year proved to be just this really horrible year, as many of you would imagine. Aside from dealing with things like PTSD and depression and panic attacks and nightmares, the perpetrator was actually set free. And so that was something that anybody who hasn't been through, it's not something you can put in words, like that feeling. Right. And what do you do with that, right? And right. So
and that's not so uncommon, which is so shocking.
Yes, exactly. And now I think of it that way. At that time, unfortunately, I was like, it was my fault, right? And so I played that blame game. And the one of the common themes was understanding, and a lesson I needed to learn and the perspective I needed to shift was that I thought my truth had to come outside of me. I thought I had to prove it for it to be true. And so this is a big message that I want to share, and where I learned to empower my story was that at some point, I had to learn that it wasn't about the truth being like, oh, this person was found guilty. It was the truth that I knew. It was anchoring myself to that truth. And without a doubt, knowing that I could stand in front of 1,000, 1,000,000 people if I had to and say my story. And that no matter what anyone else said, I knew my truth. And that was enough for me. And that's where I realized justice isn't always just. And I had to fill that space with my truth and own it and know it. And so that shifted, that's where I began to shift that perspective of that story and owning my truth. And it also became about trusting myself, which is another really big place of empowerment that I speak from, was trusting that I know who I am. I know my values, my morals. I know what I stand for. And without a doubt, again, stepping out into that crowd, knowing that those things I knew. And so going from this space of, the blame game that I shared and kind of that anxiety and depression and PTSD. My husband and I, we got married, obviously, and then we had our first son. And this was a really interesting portion of my story because there was a lot of stuff that I had tucked down, right? I hadn't quite had that
Right.
perspective shift. And so after I had my son, our first son, I didn't get that fairy tale, that the expectation that I'd set of like first time mom, I'm gonna nurse, it's gonna be amazing. No, I had postpartum depression. It was like the boulder that I hid everything under. Somebody went just like where I did. Maybe it was me. I
Right.
went and I flipped that boulder, and all of this ick and yuck came up. And I call this impulse and instinct stage of my life. I needed to survive. And I call it impulse and instinct because the instinct to survive had to be really high because there were days where it was just like the alternative was scary. And so I
Have
remember I
you,
was,
at this point, were you still trying to, still living in that the truth is outside of you?
yes, yes. So I hadn't had that perspective shift yet. During the court proceedings, they told me that I wasn't allowed to see a therapist. Like they didn't want it to change my story. But it's now looking back on it, I call BS. Like that's horrible,
I have
horrible for
never heard
anybody
that
out there.
before.
It was just again, you look back and you think, God, if I just was the person I am now, if I knew what I knew now,
Yes. Okay.
I was kind of advocating for
Right.
myself too, which was hard. I was young,
Right.
20, I was 22 years old. So no, I had gotten some help, thankfully. But at this point, I was in denial that I was having postpartum depression. And I was so good at masking it on the outside, like totally life of the party, walking out, and then inside, only the people who knew me really close really knew what I was battling. And so I was like, let's move. We moved to Colorado. I needed to like uproot and move and cut myself out of people's lives, cut people out of my life. And just that's why I was very impulsive. And so I didn't actually get diagnosed till 3 years later with postpartum depression, and then finally saw a therapist who specialized in that. And thank goodness for that, because I was able to really work through a lot of the things that I hadn't quite faced. And so that was kind of the area where I started to shift that perspective and hold on to my truth and start anchoring in that. The next thing I was going to need to do was, again, the trust. The trust was kind of that second portion, starting to trust myself and believe in myself. I was also that person who really didn't know what I wanted to do in life. So I was still squeezing myself in these boxes that I didn't fit, feeling very out of place and kind of like, I don't know who I am. I don't know who I am. I don't know where I fall. Uh, and I just kind of felt like other people's lives were just working out for them. They knew and I didn't. And it was because I didn't see my gifts as gifts. I didn't recognize them for that. I didn't believe in myself. I didn't trust myself. So then we face IVF. We couldn't get pregnant after our first son. And so this is a whole roller coaster. And then you add hormones in there. It's just this whole other beast, right?
Right.
So being able to navigate that in our marriage, that was a very trying time. It was just hard, it's just hard. It's hard. You want to be on the same page. You want to be a team. You also have a little one that you want to bring siblings in their
Right.
life. And
I
then
mean,
not to
marriage is hard to
mention,
begin with. Having a baby is hard. Bringing a baby into a marriage is hard, you know?
yes,
And then even with your husband trying to, like, he doesn't really understand what you're going through because he hasn't been through it, and not being a woman, with it's hard.
right, it is. And then, you also have to deal with the external world. Like life still goes on, people are still getting pregnant around you. And it's such this interesting thing of like, you're so happy and elated for them, and you're so devastated for yourself. Lots of bathroom tears, praying to God, crying, wondering what's wrong with you. And I think that was a trigger for me, right? To my original the original trauma, that something was wrong with me, or that I did something wrong, or that I deserved it. And so that core negative core belief, just kind of sat there. And so it was heightened at this time. And so the first round of IVF that we didn't take, and that was crushing. I didn't know if I was like supposed to be mourning like a loss, like a miscarriage, even though technically it wasn't. It's, you fall in this gray area as when you're, a person who goes through IVF, and it's just really hard. And then especially when you have a kid and you're going through IVF, because everybody's like, be grateful, you already have one kid. And it's like, I am.
That to me is like, I don't understand why there are people even thinking those, like, you are grateful you have a kid. But doesn't mean you don't get to mourn
Yeah.
the
If I had
loss.
$1, that would have, for every time somebody said, I know this is so cliche, probably have to be more than $1 these days because of,
Yeah.
costs going up. But I mean, I probably would have been able to pay for my IVF. It was a very delicate, you were uh, very alone, unless you spoke to people who are going through the process. It's just a kind of, still to this day, a little bit taboo to talk about. And so you had to really wear your feelings close. You had to be strong. And so, thankfully, I had a really good doctor who was like, hey, like, I got you. We're going to do this. You're going to get pregnant. And I did. And it ended up being twins. And so that was amazing. And so, kind of a crazy story here. I'm going to get like a little woo woo on you. I had this dream when I was pregnant. I knew I was going to have twin boys. I just knew it. I always saw myself as a boy mom. I knew it. And so, I had this dream, and I actually didn't make it through the labor in my dream. And I had a premonition like this before my 22nd birthday, and it was oddly true. And so I woke up with that same feeling, and I went and I told my husband about the dream, and I was like, hey, I just want you to know I have this like not very good feeling about the delivery. And I was like, I want you to know I love you very much, and I really want you to be able to move on. I don't want it to be this thing. I want you to move on. I want you to be happy. And so I felt so like about so much about this dream that I said the same thing to my mother. I wanted her to know. And they're like, oh, you're being silly. And unfortunately, when I went to have the twins, I should say fortunately, because I want to tell the good part of it too, is that this portion is of my story is the portion in which not only did my perspective of, my truth shift, but the trust and the who am I became into play. And so I had started dabbling with hypnobirthing at the time, like just through YouTube.
Yeah.
So this is my little disclaimer, like, yes, hire a professional. I do hypnotherapy. I don't do hypnobirthing. They're two different things. There's actually certifications for that. And so I got really into it. I had been meditating. Obviously, I also have my faith and my beliefs. And so just very wanted to approach this birth very different than I did with my first son. I had him all natural, and I just remember the pain, and I wanted this to be more peaceful. And so I practiced this, and I went into the labor room, and thankfully they're like, oh, yes, this is amazing. I can't believe it. You're going to have these twins all natural. We typically have to do epidurals. I was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's go. And so my first twin, so baby A, which is Decker, had him amazing. Like, we're talking peaceful, no pain, just incredible birth. Like, everybody's dream birth, magical. And then unfortunately, things went south, and Hendrix, baby B, got stuck in a very compromising position where it was compromising him. We had to do emergency C-section. So long story short there, the way they had to perform the C-section, I hemorrhaged. I bled out on the table. I lost over half of my blood volume, and I almost died. And all I remember as I was passing out from my blood loss was like, I just need to hear him cry. I need to know he's okay, you know? And I heard him cry, and they ended up taking him and my husband out of the room. They called the code crimson that they need to call so that I can get the blood that I need to save my life. And I remember thinking, you can just let go. Like, it's okay. And it was so peaceful. But it was that like, wait, like wait, I know what's happening. No, wait. And I was like, please God, bring me back to my boys. And all I heard was this voice that was like, you need to talk and you need to breathe. And so I was able to, this is why I'm so passionate about, hypnotherapy and, all this mindset work that I've done is I was able to bring myself back to my body, this place of consciousness, breathe. I remember opening my eyes and looking up at the anesthesiologist and telling him what was going on, what pain that I was feeling in my body and what was happening. And he just like, he looked at me like, whoa. He was like, I don't know how you're doing this. I think he said sweetheart or darling or something like that. And he was like, but I need you to stay here with me. I need you to keep talking. And I was able to do that. And I was completely calm. There was no panic. So if you talk about the shift from trauma, if we're saying, sexual assault to this, the person I was had changed so significantly in that time, just due to the work I did and the way I viewed myself, the stories that I told myself, the things that I fed my mind to the shift of I can do this. I've been through hell. I'm going to keep going and I can get through it. And I know by the grace of God, I was saved. I was able to make it through and have, beautiful, beautiful boys, all three of them. And so I knew after that, it was kind of one of those things where I was like, okay, there's a reason I'm here. Now, what am I going to do with this? And this is where I came out here on this other end of, I want this to have purpose. I want all of this to have purpose. I can't always explain everything very eloquently, but to be able to share with people who have been through things and knowing that there is that other side that you can get through and there is empowerment that you can draw from these stories. And I don't feel sad for myself anymore. I actually am very thankful for everything I went through because I knew I needed to go through all of those things to be exactly who I am at this time, in this place, for my children, for my friends, and for my clients.
Right. I mean, it's incredible. I'm always trying to tell these kids that, you know what I mean? Like, write down your story, and these hard moments are what's building you for something. And for whatever reason, like, you're never going to find a successful CEO or entrepreneur
Yeah.
or anybody at the top that doesn't have a story below them. It doesn't, there's just not a clean path to it.
There's
But,
not. And the only way through it is to go through it, to
right.
actually move through it.
I love that you're taking all of that to help other women go through it, like get through it. Because some people just need that help and someone to hold their hand and to just teach them,
Yeah. And
one on one.
to honor those parts, like I think one of the hardest things, at least I can speak for myself, like with going through depression or going through the crap end of, the deal, right? Like
Right.
somebody being free that should be in jail, is just being able to honor some of the yuck, like that yuck side of you. Also, the part at the side of you that's like, oh, if only I was more of this type of a person, if I had just been stronger, if I had just been, and being able to say, well, that is a part of me too, even if I've learned and I've grown out of it, that was a part of me at that time. Or maybe even when I thought, yes, going through IVF, there were times where I was jealous and I was envious. There were times where I felt really ugly and rotten because I was like, why do they get to have kids and I don't? I'm going to be honest. There were times and I felt awful if I thought that, awful afterward. And then it was like coupled with that, I was feeling this guilt for the thoughts that I was thinking.
Right.
And it was just kind of like, I had to just come to this place with all of these like stories that were running of just like, this is who I am. Nothing's going to sway from this is who I am,
Right.
but these parts are also me too. And that's okay. That's okay because I'm human. It's okay to not be okay, even if it doesn't feel okay. I can get help. There's going to be a new chapter. And I stopped just letting myself be a role, like play a character in my book. And that was one of the biggest realizations I had, was like, I'm just kind of like going and
Right.
just not taking that my power back. And then it was when I realized that I was just playing this role that I decided, you know what? I'm the author here. New chapter. I'm writing the rest from here on out. I'm owning this. I
Yeah.
know who I am. And, I mean, I still have little slipbacks here and there. I'm only human.
Right. Well, I love that you said that like, you know what I mean? You had those feelings and you felt them and they're real. They're very real feelings.
Yeah.
And then what do I do with that? And how do I bring it onto the other side of it? Because I mean, even like fertility, even women who choose to not have children, or women with fertility issues, or women that we are so told that we are here to bear children, like, and it's almost like that is the only thing sometimes we're told. And I like that we're coming out of that. We're not so much, but like,
Yeah.
I mean, not even that far back, like my mom's era, that was it,
Yeah.
she remembers her friend getting divorced and not being able to rent an apartment or get a
Mm.
credit card in her name. It wasn't that
Wow.
long ago that my mom actually remembers going through. We had a neighbor whose husband was beating his wife. He was very famous. He was a famous hockey player. And he used to beat his wife. And I said, why didn't she said, we all talked about it, but there was nothing, you can't really do any, like back then you just didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And as women, we are like just told these things and to be able to, so those thoughts are very real, but I love that you're like, I'm going to take these thoughts and have a mind shift. And I'm going to teach
Yeah.
women how to have that same mind shift.
Yeah, and just working with the thoughts and being okay with the fact that there's always going to be parts of us that are less than perfect. And that's where the magic happens. Because
Right.
if we look at it as is like, what can I learn from that? Like it's not to be, the goal is to never be perfect. That's not the goal because we're always striving to learn, to grow, to be enlightened, to find the parts of us that are less than perfect and love them into that wholeness because it's all just this big massive puzzle and each and every little intricate piece counts even if we have neglected the piece or lost it or feel like I don't like that portion of the picture.
Right.
It's a part of the whole picture and there is a bigger picture and that was part of that coming into that trust that there was gonna be a bigger picture to that, there was gonna be more to it, and knowing that there was going to be, you know, a sunrise the next day.
Yeah. And sometimes, unfortunately, you can't have this without that.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And like you said, anytime we look, like if we're looking to people that we look up to or that we think, ooh, wow, they have a really amazing life, they're a great person, you would take, advice from them, there's somebody you
Right.
look up to, they've typically gone through something.
Right.
And I think sometimes we tend to focus on like, the thing that shimmers more than how did they get to that? What did they sacrifice? Who did they have to become? Where is the story of resilience? Their bounce back, their comeback, their restart, their replay, I fell on my face, I got back up because we
Right.
all have we all have those in varying degrees, of course. Some are, bigger swings than others, but typically anybody that you look up to is going to have some story of resilience that they're going to tell you that you can use that to empower. And I think each and every one of us, I mean, I have yet to meet somebody who doesn't have it. They might not have found the magic in it yet or the power, that empowerment in it to fuel them, but everybody has something. And so that is a big thing, is just like, what have you been through that you can look back at and truly understand, how did you get through that? Who did you become? What was it? What qualities and characteristics did you possess? And just kind of looking like, a lot of times when I'm faced with something where I might be being a little bit negative or having some of the stinking thinking going on, I'm like, you've been through harder, let's reframe the way you're looking at this. Let's take a different approach, because we can get really complacent when life is easy and good. And sometimes then,
Right.
a curveball hits and you're like, whoa, haven't been here in a while. And it's easy to sink back into some of those old negative habits of thinking. But then when we really shift that perspective in our mind, like, I've been through harder, I've done worse, I can do this. What do I need to pull out of me of who I am to show up? How do I show up? How do I, show up for myself in thought, in voice, and in action? And that's a lot of where I work with my clients, is how those things matter and how we do that for ourselves. And then of course with the subconscious, which is something I talked about, like getting myself through the birth, is just like being able to kind of rewire the thoughts, not getting rid of them. Like, we're not extracting them. They're going to be there. You're going to have that voice of doubt every now and then. It's just how loud are you going to let that voice speak? And what are you going to really be fueling your mind with in the background? And so that's a
Right.
lot of what that meditation and that hypnosis is that I practice on my own, or I share with clients that are interested.
That was so incredibly beautifully said.
Thank
Like
you.
that, I don't know. I think I'm gonna rewind that. I think everyone should just rewind that this last couple of minutes and just re-listen to that over and over again. Like,
Oh, thank
I'm
you.
getting really emotional. I mean, really, like the road sometimes is hard, and you're right. Like, who, are you listening to people clapping? Or are you listening to people yelling? Who are you
Yeah.
listening to in your own head?
Yeah. There's a really beautiful quote by Dr. Edith Eger. I might mess it up, but she is a Auschwitz survivor, and her mom told her, "Nobody can take away from you what you put in your mind." And I just loved that, the power of that, that what happens in
Yeah,
here that we sometimes just really don't pay attention to is so important. And to also to that respect, that sometimes what we say in here is so unimportant. So like, what are you placing the importance of, and what are you pulling from outside and personalizing internally that doesn't belong in there, right? And it's kind of just navigating that, and really being able to have somebody to sit with you if you're struggling to do it yourself, and help you navigate, like, what doesn't belong in here, because what you put in here, like, nobody can take away. So let's fill it up with good stuff, with empowering things, and with this understanding and compassion, and the fact that you're not your mistakes, you're not your emotions, you're not even your thoughts, but you create them. So
right.
let's create some beauty, some
Yeah.
strength.
I can't tell you how I lived in that thought pattern for so many, many, many years of my life, where everything else got to dictate. Even this podcast, I started this because I wanted to be a talk show host, and I didn't follow that dream as a kid because I didn't think I was pretty enough. That
Oh,
was my thought. And if you look at the people that were talk show hosts, it wasn't like, supermodels, but that is the exact reason I didn't want follow my dreams.
oh my
Never,
gosh.
ever went for it. And then one day I said, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to start a podcast because I can,
Yes.
just
Yes.
like feeding that inner child, right? Like
Yes. Though,
racing anything that's
we
not.
get to go back and we get to stand up for her. We get to say, hey, let me take your hand, come with me,
Yeah,
and let's do it. And it's interesting because so many of us, when we actually tackle the reason why we didn't do, isn't it interesting when we're at this level of where our perspective changes, we're
right.
like, what?
Yeah.
What? Like, why did that stop me?
Literally was the exact reason when I went into college. I said, I'm not going to do what I wanted to do, I just didn't do because of my mindset.
Oh man.
I
Yeah.
love
Well,
that
I'm
we have
really
all of
happy
this
that you're doing
now.
this now.
I am too, but I'm really happy that this next, wave that we are riding right now is telling people like you can shift that
Yeah.
thinking, and that doesn't have to be your truth, and it doesn't have to be, you know,
And we're understanding not only just the neuroscience behind the way we think. And I always think of it as like, what is that? It's a flow chart, right? So you
right,
start with this original thought, and then it's like you typically take this pattern of thinking. And so when we begin to look and dissect some of these like main common themes as if it's a flow chart, and we begin to follow the pattern, we realize how we can break the pattern. Like, what's the trigger that goes into the, say, core belief? And then do I typically think in this manner? And then we can start to disrupt it. And that's what a lot of this work as a coach is being able to recognize that thought process, disrupt the pattern, and begin to have you more often than not. That's like one of my favorite things, like more often than not, think in this, positive. When I say positive thinking, I'm not talking about forced positivity. I'm talking about the fluff. Yes, I do fluffy stuff too, because there is a method to it if you use
right,
it right, like affirmations and mantras and things like that. There is a way to use these in a right way. And so it is really disrupting that and getting, like you said, out of that mindset. It's shifting perspective. It's realizing the stories that you're holding on to that you're allowing to be, basically the guidelines of the path you're walking. Whereas, it should just be these trails that you have all these options, because we have a growth mindset. We know we're capable of learning. We're capable of building our confidence. Confidence is a practice. People aren't just born, oozing it. Yeah, there are some people who are naturally inclined, but it is
Right.
still something they practice. They still put themselves in positions that scare them. They still
Right.
take those risks. They're just more willing to do it than we are. It's all these things are practice. Positive thinking, it's a practice. I know when I get out of the habit of positive thinking. I'm not like this superhuman who never thinks negatively. I definitely, but the difference is that I've trained myself to begin to think that, or to, excuse me, have this self-awareness. And that's a big a space to start when we're looking for this growth and change. And what was it for you? I'm curious, like when you decided to do this podcast and you remember and you think back on that time, what was it like? What was
I
that transition piece for
I
you?
have a hard time when people talk about your inner child or going back to your childhood or embracing that, because I feel like I allowed so many things to stop me. I grew up in a very patriarchal family. I am Greek, and I heard my dad, well, my dad, I mean, God bless him, and he has passed away, but he was born and raised in a village in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had the tools that he had, and his toolbox said women were second class citizens. And even today, they're treated like, even today, when I see what happens with all the legal stuff going on with his property and stuff there, my mom is treated like a second class citizen.
Yeah.
And and I grew up with that. Two brothers, 1 year older, 1 year younger. And so I allowed that thinking that I was less than for being a woman. I never felt very comfortable in my own skin. I didn't feel very pretty. I didn't feel very, I was this great athlete who just never put anything into it because I just felt like that was I didn't want to bulk up and be too manly. Like, you know what I mean? It was just,
Right.
there was a rule. And I just, when I think about my inner child, going through that, I just had a hard time embracing that, and just saying that I did the best I could to survive, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to I just allowed these thoughts to come into my head and hold me back in so many different ways, in soccer, in everything that I did. I just allowed these thoughts to hold me back. And why wasn't I strong enough then? And so at some point I said, I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to embrace that inner child and just say, you know what, you deserve it. You
Yeah.
deserve to have everything everybody else does.
Right.
And I
You
said,
liberated you liberated her so that you could be free to do what you've always wanted to
yeah.
do.
So then I said, I'm just going to do this. And I want to tell people stories. And that's what I want other people, we all have a
Yeah.
story, and I want people to have a voice. And so
Wow.
I wanted
That's
to be the catalyst for that, I guess.
yes, absolutely. I feel that for you, for sure. That's really beautiful that you were able to go back to that inner child and, you know, basically take her hand and say, let's do it. We got this now.
Yeah. I feel like love on her. I don't think she felt very loved as a, you know,
Yeah, I can see that. Well, I think that, like you said, you survived the way you knew how at the time. And the it's when we're children, obviously, and I can't speak for you, but we have beliefs and fears imposed upon us that aren't our own, and we take them on, and we learn to read the room, and we learn to know when our opinion is able to be spoken and when it's not, whether it's girl or boy,
yeah,
right? But in your household, absolutely. And so I think that, you obviously didn't know better at that time. And so being able to now go back and meet her wherever it was that you needed to and say, hey, I didn't know better now, but I know now what I want to do and where I want to take you, and letting her feel safe and loved, that your opinion matters, what you want to do matters, you're beautiful, you're worthy, you're enough. just as you are, and being able to continue that healing. And that's the thing too, is that the healing isn't always just the slam dunk that we hit on the first. We have to keep working at it, and we have little triggers that come up and we're like, oh, that little part of my little 5-year-old self isn't healed. I need to love her. And how do I go about doing that? And I think we're learning so much in our child, the nervous system, where we're storing this in our body and how that impacts us, and where the nervous system is playing a role. And so there's so
Right.
much really amazing information coming out, and healing and different modalities, and how we can use these tools to make this kind of whole healing of everything that's just, that truly just comes from within
I,
us.
I think you hit on it when you said like where we're storing it in our bodies. Like people don't realize that storing that stuff is what's making you sick. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like it's
Absolutely.
you have to let it you have to let it go. And
Process.
I do the
Yeah.
same thing, right? It's some days are just hard and I try to tell myself like, did I do something today that scared me? Like sometimes when I just don't want to walk through that door and I'll just say, what did I do today that scares me? This will be my thing.
Yeah.
Try to get myself to keep moving forward because some days are. Some days you just wake up feeling that burden
Yeah.
you carry.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's just being able to, if you doing those mindful check-ins of understanding your body, understanding how you're feeling, and recognizing, your whether it's lack of energy or pain in your shoulder,
Yeah,
whatever it might be, to truly try and understand what that could be from, because sometimes it's a lot deeper than we really, really think it is. And that's where, like I said, other modalities come in depending on what people are willing to kind of venture out and seek for themselves. I always say healing's not a one size fits all, which sounds kind of funny because it's like, well, why isn't it? Everybody can heal. Well, it's not a one size fits all in the sense that, we're all going to have something that resonates with us better. Like that's why there's coaches, there's therapists, there's Reiki, there's yoga, there's, meditation, you have neurofeedback, all of this really great. I will say we're very fortunate to live in this time in terms of that, and having all this new information and knowledge come out that we can use all these things to at our disposal.
right. And I encourage people to use them. Use your resources
Yes.
because even though it's out there, sometimes people are still afraid to use them.
Oh yeah. I think I don't know. Like even when I think back to when I was first going through the postpartum depression, I was like, it was so hard because in my mind I was like, I just felt weak. And that was that first hurdle of I wake up every day like
Yeah.
fighting this. There is strength in that vulnerability. And I realized I needed to redefine like my idea of strength. I thought that was just like the loudest person that came in the room that was super strong, that could speak what they, and I
Right.
was like, you know what? There is so much strength in the person that can ask for help. There's so much strength in the person who is it at the the what would be the bottom, rock bottom, but is like there's something up there. I've got to get up there. There's so much strength, and
Right.
I found my strength in my weakness. Honestly, that's where I found it, was when I was in my weakest, most vulnerable place.
Right. 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 And you're not alone. Even holding your own hand, you've
Yeah,
got a whole nother hand to hold.
yeah.
Well, Christy, I really appreciate your honesty
Thank
and
you.
your vulnerability. And
Thank you.
how could people get a hold of you?
Absolutely. So Soul Vibes, that's my business name. I have Instagram. You can find me on there if you just type in Soul Vibes, it should come up, Soul Vibes Life Coach. Other than Instagram, I can be emailed. I don't know if it's easy for me to send you my
Yeah, I'll
email.
link
I
everything up below.
can link that. That would be the easiest way. Call, text, taking in person, also virtual as well. And if I have another speaking engagement, I don't have one set up quite yet. So, or a workshop, I'll be sure to be posting about those things as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. You have been so fun to talk to. Thank you, everyone.